Hopefully the connection's good. We'll be starting in less than a minute. Hello, who's there? Ryan, Rick, Jake. Hello, everybody. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. So we're continuing on with our study of Vissudhimagga chapter by chapter, and we're getting into the final sections now. It's getting a bit more deep in some ways. Just to reminder, this is a classic. This is a Path of Purification in English. It's a classic text in the Theravada tradition, written by Buddhaghosa about 1,000 years after the Buddha, so about 400 AD in Sri Lanka. And it follows it's a very tightly structured work. It follows the stages of insight as a framework, although it goes off into a lot of digressions. So it's intended, first of all, as a meditation manual, but it also serves as a kind of encyclopedia of the Theravada Buddhist doctrine. And today's chapter, chapter 20, is titled Purification by Knowledge and Vision of What is the Path and What is Not the Path. And I've been, for the last few chapters particularly, I've been also comparing this work to Mahasi Sayadaw's Progress of Insight. And I noted last week that there's a bit of a difference here in that they put the 10 corruptions of insight into a different section. Mahasi puts them in with the last purification by overcoming doubt. Buddhaghosa puts them here in this one. It's a minor technical difference, not of great importance. The chapter of Mahasi's chapter on this section is pretty brief. Just basically says once you get past the 10 corruptions, then you're really on your way. Buddhaghosa goes into some more detail. He talks about, first of all, there's a discussion about full understanding and what he calls insight comprehension by groups. And basically what this is for many pages, a very detailed and technical way of talking about the three characteristics. He goes into quite a lot of detail based on Abhidhamma and so on. But really what we're talking about in the essence of it is that the meditator comes to see the nature of the three characteristics, dukkha, anicca, anatta. And comprehension by groups means that one examines different aspects of experience and applies that three characteristics. And there's a list in paragraph 9. There's a list of 24 of these groups, beginning with the states that occur in the doors of consciousness, together with the with the objects, the 5 aggregates, the 6 doors, the 6 objects, the 6 kinds of consciousness, etc., etc. Those 24 groups that are ways of analyzing reality, and one can examine these and apply the 3 characteristics to all of them. There's kind of an interesting footnote that I'd like to comment on. It's a quote from the commentary to Buddhaghosa's work, or the sub-commentary, I guess you should call it, the Tika, that says that there was a different way of interpreting comprehension by groups in Sri Lanka and in India. The Sri Lankan Buddhists interpret it this way, Buddhaghosa's way, in these various groups of reality, but the Indian Buddhists limited it to objects of the past, present, and future. That's as far as it's just a kind of a bald statement, but it occurred to me possibly in India that the Theravadins in India may still have been feeling themselves in competition with the Sarvastivadins. And the whole issue of the nature of time was the real split between Theravada and Sarvastivada. The Sarvastivadins, as far as I know, never really had any presence in Sri Lanka. So it would not have been an issue for them. Then there's another point worth commenting on in paragraph 18. There's a list which occurs elsewhere of the it's from, I think it's from the Vissudhimagga, which is kind of it's 40 factors that are kind of an expansion or elaboration of the 3 characteristics. He sees the 5 aggregates as, and then there's these 40 characteristics: impermanent, painful, disease, a boil, a dart, a calamity, an affliction, as alien, as disintegrating, as a plague, etc., etc. This list is basically boils down to the 3 characteristics. When you say something is alien, it means, not me, not mine. As Mara's bait, as subject to birth, as subject to aging, etc., etc. And he does some definition of these 40 factors. Then he gets into this, what I said, he gets really into details, the weeds of analyzing materiality or the body and immateriality or the mind. And a lot of this is in terms of Abhidhamma and referencing the different categories that we looked at in chapter 14. And the translator Nyanamoli references him back with those identity numbers. One thing interesting to comment on here is one way of looking at impermanence is to see that whatever materiality arises at one stage disappears and is changed in the next stage. It breaks up a human life into different segments, and one of them is into decades. Where's that? Oh yeah, here it is. The decades of a human life taken as being 100 years. The first 10 years are the tender decade, because he is a tender, unsteady child. The next 10 years are called the sporting decade, for he is very fond of sport then. The next 10 years are called the beauty decade, for beauty reaches its full extent. The next 10 years are called the strength decade, for his strength and power reach their full extent. The next 10 years, that is, from 40, the 40s, are called the understanding decade, for his understanding is well established by then. He adds, even in one naturally weakened understanding, some understanding, it seems, may arise at this time. The next 10 years, like from 50, are the decline. It's all downhill from here. The declining decade. Then the 60s are the stooping decade. The 70s are the bent decade. And then the 80s are the dotage decade. And then the 90s are the prone decade. There's also in this same section there's a mention of noticing impermanence while walking. That when you lift up the foot, shift the foot forward, shift sideways, lower down, placing down, fixing down, these are all specific stages of walking, and you can see the impermanence and the change from one to the other. One thing that might not be completely evident is he talks about how materiality completely doesn't pass over. That it's obvious from one life to the next, but even from one period of life to the next, changes. And he mentions different kinds of factors. There's a list that comes up different places. It says interior, exterior, great and little, near and far. And he says, that which is near does not pass over to that which is far, which seems counterintuitive until you understand the Abhidhamma principle, which Buddhaghosa, remember, was steeped in Abhidhamma. It's one of the ideas in Abhidhamma is that motion is impossible. Dhammas cease where they arise. And what we perceive as motion of a physical object is subsequent arising in adjacent locations. The Abhidhamma view of material objects is that they're composed of dhammas, like atoms that flash in and out of existence and only persist for a moment. There's another point somewhere in this section. I'm not going to try and find it sort of in passing, but it's referenced also in a footnote. It says that he talks about things arising and ceasing. He says that one notices a thing arising and one should notice the thing ceasing. And the footnote says this is not to say that there is no moment of stability in between, but it's just that it's not evident, not easy to notice. This is again another early controversy in Buddhism. The Theravada Abhidhamma held that when a Dhamma arises, there's a moment of arising, then a moment of stability where it exists, and then a moment of ceasing where it ceases to exist. And this is all extremely brief, tiny fraction of a nanosecond. But other schools of Buddhism held there is no moment of stability. Things arise and then immediately cease. So that was one of the sort of scholastic disputes that kept people busy in the monasteries in those days. I think the next section of importance here is paragraph 89, the 18 principal insights. By number one, by developing the contemplation of impermanence, he abandons the perception of permanence. By developing contemplation of pain, he abandons the perception of pleasure. So that would be in Pali dukkha and sukha. One who develops the contemplation of not self abandons the perception of self. One who develops the contemplation of dispassion abandons delighting. The contemplation of fading away abandons greed. Contemplation of cessation abandons origination. Contemplation of relinquishment abandons grasping. Contemplation of destruction abandons the perception of compactness. Compactness is, and I don't recall the Pali term, but it's an illusory concept that we impose on objects with our mind. So we see things as discrete objects. We don't see them as main parts and pieces. And it's supposed to be one of the insights that comes from doing 32 parts of the body, for example. You mentally dissect the body into bits and pieces, so you no longer see it as a compact, solid form. So that illusion of compactness is the way that the mind avoids seeing or misses seeing emptiness. One who develops contemplation of the fall of formations abandons accumulation of karma. One who develops contemplation of change abandons perception of lastingness. One who develops contemplation of the signless abandons the sign. The signless contemplation is impermanence. Sign is in Pali is nimitta, and in jhana meditation, one has a nimitta, a fixed object that the mind focuses on. So there's at least a continuity of an object. It's not permanent, but it continues for the period of the meditation, if the meditation is strong. But the signless liberation is when one fully understands impermanence, that there's no nimittas, animitta. One who develops contemplation of the desireless abandons desire. Contemplation of voidness abandons misinterpreting. One who develops insight into states that are higher understanding abandons misinterpreting due to grasping at a core. This is another way of talking about emptiness, no core or lack of an ultimate essence. One who develops correct knowledge and vision abandons misinterpreting due to confusion. One who develops contemplation of danger abandons misinterpreting due to reliance and taking false security and samsaric conditions. One who develops contemplation of reflection abandons non-reflection. One who develops the contemplation of turning away abandons misinterpreting due to bondage. So those are called the 18 principal insights. And Buddhaghosa doesn't really go into expanding on those, which is a bit unusual for him. The next section is titled The Knowledge of Rise and Fall, which is a critical insight that the meditator has at this stage, seeing how phenomena arise and fall due to conditions. Things arise according to causes and conditions, and not otherwise. And whatever arises, it will fall. And he relates this to the dependent origination. He talks about seeing the dependent origination in forward and reverse order. The forward order is because of X, Y, because of Y, Z. The reverse order is because X does not occur, then Y does not occur. For example, I'll just read this one sentence or two out. The characteristic of not-self becomes evident to him through seeing rise according to condition, owing to his discovery that states have no curiosity and that their existence depends upon conditions. The characteristic of impermanence becomes evident to him through seeing rise and fall according to instant owing to his discovery of non-existence, after having been and owing to his discovery that they are secluded from past and future. The characteristic of pain, dukkha, becomes evident to him through owing to his discovery of oppression by rise and fall. So the core insight here is that the meditator sees the objects of body and mind as being in constant flux. They're coming into existence and passing out of existence. And he has some similes drawn, most of them drawn from different places in the suttas. His formations are short-lived, like dewdrops, like bubbles on water, like a line drawn on water, like a mustard seed balanced on an awl point, like a lightning flash. They appear without core, like a conjuring trick, like a mirage, like a dream, like the circle of a whirling firebrand, like a goblin city, like froth, like a plantain trunk, and so on. Then the final section of the chapter, before there's a brief conclusion, but the final section is discussing the 10 perfections of insight. And he makes the point on the outset that these only arise for someone who has reached a certain stage of insight. So they're a good sign in themselves, but they're called imperfections or corruptions in another translation. I think that's the translator Mahasisada uses corruptions. Here they're called imperfections. They're all kind of feel-good, positive states that can arise in the meditator's experience, and for many meditators, they're mistaken for enlightenment, so that wastes time and throws them off the course. Just a brief, the 10 imperfections or corruptions are illumination, meaning a bright light, knowledge, rapturous happiness, tranquility, bliss, resolution, exertion, assurance, equanimity, and attachment. And he talks about the danger of misapprehending these. Can be done in different ways. If someone thinks, to take the example of illumination or the bright light, illumination has arisen in me, then he is fallen prey to false view, because he puts it related to a self. I am illuminated. If he takes it thus, how agreeable this illumination that has arisen is. His way of taking is due to pride. When he relishes the illumination, his way of taking is due to conceit. But if he is a wary meditator and wise, he will just see them as these are more phenomena, these are just impermanent, they're just empty, they're just suffering in the end. So he gets past he gets past the 10 corruptions. And this is said to be a critical stage in in the meditation when a person sees through the 10 corruptions. This is really then the knowledge of what is path and what is not path. You see that this is not the path. This is just a sideshow. And in his concluding paragraph, he makes I think a significant point. He says that at this point in the meditator's progress, he has understood in some depth the 3 of the noble truths, leaving only the truth of the third truth, the truth of Nibbana, has not yet been penetrated. And the remaining chapters are the final stages up to liberation. It's been said by some teachers in the Vipassana tradition that the real meditation only starts at this stage, when one has reached knowledge of one's path and not path. And it's often taken to be the definition of a chula sotapanna, or a little stream winner. One has not yet realized Nibbana, one's not a stream winner, but they're definitely on their way. Okay, so next time we go on the next chapter, chapter 21. It's purification by knowledge and vision of the way, and we're getting into the home stretch really, and this covers what's sometimes been called, using language from the Christian tradition, the dark night of the soul. It's covering the stages when the meditator is beginning to see the danger and the terror of samsara, but is not yet seen beyond that. So it's a difficult passage for many people. So we'll talk about that next week, and I'll stop there for now and see what I can answer from the chat. I see there's something already in there. Did Buddhaghosa originally come from India, then wrote the book in Sri Lanka? Yes, that is true. I think one of my early talks in this series, I talked about Buddhaghosa's biography a little bit. Buddhaghosa was a Brahmin from North India, and he was versed in the Vedas. And at some point he converted to Buddhism, and he said that he went to Sri Lanka in search of the commentaries, the old commentaries, the Atthakatha, written in Pali, but they were lost in India. Even in Sri Lanka, they didn't exist in Pali, but they had translations into Sinhalese, and he spent many years back translating them to Pali. And the Vissudhimagga is his own work, but it's kind of a summary of everything. Next question. I try to see my intentions to do things before I do them by using physical movement. I can't catch the intention to move the hand before it is moving. It's skillful to try. So, if yes, how? Yeah, that's actually very important in practicing Vipassana meditation, is to notice intentions. It's easier to do if you're very still and you're not moving very much. But if you're sitting in meditation and you want to change your posture, for example, you've got a pain in the leg and you want to shift your weight, the correct procedure is first of all to notice discomfort before you do anything, and then to notice the intention to move, and then only then move. And if you get good at that, you can go on to more subtle bodily intentions. There's an intention when you swallow. You swallow saliva periodically. First there's a discomfort of too much saliva in the mouth, then there's an intention to swallow, then only do you swallow. And there's an even subtler one that if you can catch that, it's you're really doing well. It's the intention to blink when the eyes are open. And then there's intentions in the mind. If you can catch the intention to think, then you can keep the mind very quiet, because before any thought arises in the mind, there's an intention to think. And it's not yet a thought. It doesn't have any content, but there's a kind of a bubbling up from the depth, a kind of congealing in the mind. You can feel that, and then notice that's an intention to think, and cut it off there. and the thought never arises. Ajahn, question about Chakra Sutta Samyutta 25. Does this mean a faith follower will for sure gain stream entry if they accept the anicca of the six senses? Without exactly referring to the text, I think that's correct. By seeing any of the three characteristics in depth, you gain liberation. The difference between a faith follower and a Dhamma follower is that a faith follower is primarily motivated by saddha. They have faith, and this carries them through. The Dhamma follower doesn't have so much faith. It's not without faith, but he has, that's not primary. His primary characteristic. It's more knowledge and investigation. But they end up going to the same place. What are Buddhism's view on transgender people? I know there are concepts of transgender in Hinduism, but I'm not sure about Buddhism. Well, the whole category of transgender is kind of a modern definition. There is, it doesn't come up in the suttas. There is in the Vinaya a category of people that are called pandakas, and they're defined in different ways. But they're all people who have some kind of unusual gender identity. And the main point about pandakas in the Vinaya is they're not allowed to ordain. Next one. If a married laywoman becomes an arahant, then her husband tries to initiate intimate relations. What happens? Arahants are not thoughts of lust or ill will. But at the same time, an arahant accepts the reality with equanimity and has no aversion, so the arahant wife tolerates her husband advances. It is a grave offense to touch an arahant. I think if a married man or a woman becomes an arahant, they would dissolve the marriage. They would not stay with a partner. It would be too difficult. If one partner is an arahant, the other is still worldly and still has desire, that's not going to work. I feel the sense of samvega growing in me more every day. Can you speak on it for better clarification? Samvega is sometimes translated as urgency. It's the sense that there's a strong motivation to get out of samsara, and one sees the problems in samsara and makes an effort to gain liberation. How does one know if one's a chula sotapanna? Is it a gradual, or is there a clear marker moment that signifies it? I would say it's more. It's a fairly distinct transition. I don't know if you could put it down to a single moment. It's when one sees through the play of samsara. Sees that and it takes its form in seeing through the corruptions of insight, because it's kind of easier. Maybe it's not trivial, but it's easier to see through the negative things, like there's pain and death, and I don't want that. But to see bright lights and feelings of joy and bliss and being really energized, and to see that as basically samsara, then I really got to get out of this whole sideshow. Is there a reason in the suttas the Buddha did not go into as much intricate detail as Abhidhamma? Seems like the Abhidhamma has a lot of attention to minute details. Yes, it definitely does. The Abhidhamma was, uh, well, the traditional story of the origin of Abhidhamma was that it's a it's the teachings the Buddha gave to the Devas in Tawatingsa heaven. So it's at a very high level. And then he came down to earth and passed on to Sariputta a kind of dumbed down version for human consumption that humans could understand. That became the core of Abhidhamma, and then elaborated by Sariputta. Probably historically, the Abhidhamma actually arose later, than the suttas, probably a few centuries later, as an expression of the kind of institutionalization of Buddhism, and a kind of, which we see in other religions as well. There's a kind of a impetus to really nail down the details, and a kind of scholastic mind that wants to really get into the fine, cross all the T's and dot all the I's, and close up all any kind of open areas. The Buddha taught what was needed for liberation. Abhidhamma gets into a lot of metaphysics and ontology that the Buddha really wasn't interested in discussing. What is a normal householder wife supposed to do on the subject of sexual relations with her husband? Well, I mean, that's between the two of them to work it out. I can't comment on that. How to escape conditionality, Bhante? Well, this is what we're talking about in these next few chapters, is by seeing through the nature of samsara. Basically, by first understanding conditionality in depth, then you can escape from it. What would you think the ratio of sutta study versus meditation should be? More practice and study. I think that varies by the individual and the proclivity of the individual. But definitely meditation practice is a priority. Is samvega the emotion that urges a person to ordain? Yeah, samvega is definitely a big part of that. So was the Abhidhamma the Buddha gave to the Devas different from modern day Abhidhamma? Well, if we were to take that story on face, yeah, that it would be even more detailed and complex. And what we have is just a kind of simplified version. What benefits, if any, could you see of incorporating a straight 4-hour block of meditation? Yeah, I think that's very beneficial to have the continuity of practice. When you say a 4-hour block of meditation, that doesn't necessarily mean sitting for 4 hours. That's very difficult to do. Some people are able to benefit from long sits like that, but I would think most people would benefit more from switching between walking and sitting. And if you're going to do a 4-hour block, my own preference and advice would be to start with walking. Walk and a sit, then a walk and a sit. Is there a particular practice or object of meditation to make the most of these blocks? No, which work on. Only thing I would say is you might get the most benefit by sticking to one particular form of meditation for the entire 4 hours. Okay, so I think we'll stop there for today. That was some interesting questions, and we'll come back next week. And if you're reading along, which I would encourage, it's a good idea to do. This is chapter 21. We'll be doing next week.